Visit the agenda and watch replay tabs to add sessions that interest you to your own event. You can go back to My Event to revisit any bookmarked sessions, sponsors, and items. We want to make sure that you're connecting with our industry-leading sponsors. You can interact with them by visiting the Booths and the Sponsor tab. You can also bookmark sponsors or add items to your event to view later. Sponsors have uploaded extra materials for attendees. Make sure to visit sponsors that interest you to chat with one of their team members or save documents for later. We have dedicated meeting slots set up for break times between sessions. Continue the discussion by requesting meetings from others in the SwapCard platform. Schedule a meeting with another attendee or a sponsor by visiting their page. The panelists and speakers will be addressing your questions live during the stream. During the stream, use the question tab to ask your questions early in the presentation. Go to the poll tab to answer polls that will be discussed during the live stream. If you need help navigating SwapCard, please reach out to our team by mentioning @Parks Associates in the chat box or by contacting one of our team members via our company page. Welcome to Parks Associates' 25th Annual Connections Conference. We're hosting sessions throughout the year, but this week features big conversations on the state of the industries we cover and officially marks our 25th anniversary of hosting this awesome event. My name is Elizabeth Parks, and I'm the president of Parks Associates. We want to thank you for joining us and supporting our event this year. Executive conferences have always been a part of Parks Associates' core business, bringing together leadership of companies developing services and products and driving innovation in the connected home, smart home, entertainment, security, connected health, support services, digital media, and OTT pay TV services. Over the past few decades, Parks Associates has worked with thousands of companies, sharing our knowledge and insights conducted throughout millions of responses from consumers. Our goal is to provide clients and the industries we serve with the best in consumer and market insights. We cover emerging technologies and specifically the impact and opportunities as ecosystems overlap. 35 years ago, Tricia Parks founded Parks Associates after working as VP of Research for another firm called Future Computing. The initial focus of Parks Associates was within the computing sector, with an emphasis in understanding the diffusion of computing technologies, specifically the PC in consumers' homes. As a consumer researcher, she had a vision for how technology could change the way we live and work. Tricia grew Parks Associates slowly and independently, covering the consumer tech markets and adding expertise in broadband technologies and adoption, home networking and residential gateways, utility deregulation and consumer choice, home controls, and entertainment, with a vision of mass market adoption for technologies, creating a whole home technology experience for consumers with integration across the various ecosystems in the home. When Connections was hosted for the first time in 1996, we called it the Residential Gateway and Home Networking Conference, before settling on the final name Connections in 1998. But with a tagline that has changed over the years with the growth and innovation of technology, we started with enabling the networked home, then went through a few more tagline changes, including in-home networking and gateways, the International Home Networking and Gateways Conference, the Digital Home Conference, and the Digital Living Conference. And for the past few years, we have maintained the event tagline, the Premier Connected Home Conference. In 2006, we started hosting Connections Europe in order to address key issues for the European markets. Throughout the years, we have talked about the adoption of broadband, the distribution of technology products, and the consumer demand. And the residential gateway, the home network, and broadband have always been at the center of the conversation. The technology enabling these products to deliver on their promise has always been at the heart of our conversation. Also, the partnerships, new relationships between ecosystem players, and the entrance of the tech giants in the past decade have been critical to understanding the evolution of the connected home. More importantly, though, is our focus on the consumer and the adoption and intentions consumers have to bring and pay for these new technologies in their homes. Our research is the backdrop of everything we do and leads our analysis and insights that we share at our events. One thing that has not changed is our desire to bring you leading industry insights from our talented research and analyst team and from leading experts from top companies in these fields. Our team is ready to connect and learn more about your company's offerings. Thank you for joining us today and for the last 25 years. We look forward to the connections that await.
Wow, what a great retrospective from Elizabeth there. Hello and welcome. I'm Jennifer Kent, Vice President of Research at Parks Associates, and I am so proud to be part of the team bringing you the 25th Connections Conference. I love Connections not only because it allows us to connect with you, but because we want you to connect with each other, learn what others are doing in this space, make new connections, and move the industry forward. And these companies in particular are helping us do that through their sponsorship. So thank you, Alarm.com, Calix, Cox Communities, SmartRent, Bitdefender, Tuya, Ayla Networks, Plume, and AirTies. We really appreciate your support. And thank you to the industry associations and media organizations supporting this conference as well. As Elizabeth mentioned, an independent, exceptional research is at the heart of what we do. We conduct both syndicated research on connected home solutions and emerging consumer technology on a planned publication roadmap, as well as custom research for our clients across a variety of methodologies. And certainly, we would love for our research to be part of the tool set that you rely upon to help guide your strategic decision-making and product planning. This morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're at, we will be looking at the state of the smart home. I'll be starting off bringing a little bit of our research and perspective to bear. Then we will hear from the CTO of Silicon Labs, Daniel Cooley, within his Visionary Insight talk. Then we'll hear an executive Q&A chat between Vicki Rogers, who's the Vice President of Cox Communities, with Senior Analyst Patrice Samuels. We'll then have a full interactive panel talking about the state of the smart home and the consumer experience with industry leaders from Silicon Labs, Resideo, Alarm.com, Allegion, Google Thread Group, and Craftful. Once we wrap our content in this session, we invite all of our speakers and all of you attending today to join us for some networking discussions in a Zoom chat room that our team will be posting in the chat feature. Before we hear from our industry speakers today, I want to take stock of where the smart home market stands today. We are coming off of a year of transformation for both the consumer and the industry, where we saw some major moves from industry players. And how have those impacted the market? Also, where is new growth going to come from? We'll look at new use cases and industry verticals that will push the smart home market in new directions, as well as focus in on some end customer segments that are driving new growth. From about March of last year to today, it feels like just about everything has changed in response to the pandemic. And While the COVID-19 virus continues to surge around the world, in the United States, consumers and businesses are starting to open up and move forward, but with new behaviors and new expectations. During the pandemic, we saw more than a third of households have at least one family member work from home, and 1 in 5 have a household member learn from home. We saw major increases in household connectivity demands, both on the broadband coming into the house, as well as on the functioning of the home network. We saw consumer familiarity with and use of a variety of technology solutions and services rise, and consumers' overall attitude towards technology as valuable, as useful, and really as necessary heightened. While many households tightened their wallet, spending on technology rose, as did spending on home improvements, so consumers' spaces could support them and work for them in new ways. Ultimately, industry players need to understand how consumer needs have changed and modify or invent solutions that meet them. Amidst this disruptive year, the smart home market continued its steady growth, with 34% of consumers owning a core smart home device and 41% owning any remotely monitored connected home device. And not only are new households getting in on the smart home trend, but households are adding more devices to their collection. 17% of US broadband households are now what we call smart home power users, meaning they own at least 5 smart home devices. And this rate has just about doubled in the past 2 years. And as you see here, 9% are what we call superpower users, meaning they own 10 or more smart home devices. At the same time, and perhaps relatedly, we've seen substantial product and service price declines over the past few years, which is absolutely necessary to attract a more mainstream buyer. For instance, network camera buyers paid an average of $189 for their device in 2017, and this has dropped to $136 in 2020. Smart thermostat price paid dropped from $177 to $111 in the same time frame, and we saw declines in price paid for locks as well. And companies are taking a variety of strategies to offer value tier products and services. Wise, for instance, has launched a whole portfolio of value tier products, really staking its brand on making affordable consumer tech, from cameras and lighting to weight scales and headphones. Abode, meanwhile, offers products at different price points. The company recently launched a $35 camera, the Abode Cam 2, designed for both indoor and outdoor use, which joins its outdoor smart camera with a premium price tag of $260. So products at both ends of the spectrum there. On the services side, Canary recently announced professional monitoring for its all-in-one security solution for just $9.99 a month. And this is among the most affordable on market for self-install solutions, matching Ring's $10 a month price point. It's also lower than Simply Safe's $15 a month and Blue by ADT's $20 a month price points. And all of this downward pricing pressure, of course, opens the market to new buyer segments. If premium pricing has been one factor holding back the smart home from really taking off, the other is fragmentation. This month, the industry initiative formerly known as Connected Home over IP or CHIP rebranded itself as Matter, a connectivity standard designed for products to interoperate reliably and securely regardless of platform, and a product certification process and brand designed to ensure customers of product compatibility. Of course, cross-industry alliances are difficult to maintain when players start to see an advantage of going their own way, but with support from tech giants Amazon, Google, Apple, and Samsung, broadband leaders like Comcast, and IoT leaders like Assa Abloy, IKEA, Resideo, and Schneider Electric, this particular alliance may have the backing and certainly the marketing power to achieve that ever elusive promise of interoperability in the connected home. Industry leaders across the board made some major moves this year that speak to overall industry trends. Google announced a massive $450 million investment in ADT in August of 2020. And the initial outcome of this partnership is that ADT now sells and professionally installs Google Nest, Mini, Hub, and Hub Max products, and ADT customers can control their smart security systems via voice with compatible Google Nest products. Amazon's Ring partnered with top home builder Lennar to create Lennar communities connected by Ring, and this partnership brings a new suite of smart home products pre-installed as part of Lennar's Everything Included home package. Comcast entered the DIY security market with affordable cameras and self-monitoring fees for its Xfinity broadband subscribers, priced at about $10 per month. And then companies in the PropTech space offering smart building operating systems and access control solutions like SmartRent and Latch are going public with absolutely enormous valuations. SmartRent is going public with a $2.2 billion deal, and Latch merged with Tishman Speyer to go public with an equity value reported at over $1.5 billion. And so these deals really highlight the scale of the MDU opportunity for smart home players. Building on all of this momentum, we see new smart home growth coming from new use cases, new verticals, and new buyer types. Simply put, consumers have new needs and new concerns coming out of the pandemic, and that means that there are new use cases that have earned some spotlight. For instance, consumers have new concerns about the health and safety of their home environments. 1 in 4 U.S. broadband households reported thinking about the quality of their air inside their home or the quality of their water differently due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This opens an opportunity for device manufacturers and service providers to help consumers in making their home not just a smart home, but a healthier home. Air quality and water quality monitoring join a number of use cases that are even more compelling today than they were 12 or 18 months ago. Reliable, high-performing broadband and secure home networks that can keep up with new demands and that give consumers control over how and when their devices connect are more important than ever, and really are the foundation of the smart home experience. Advanced networking solutions are critical in a world with a much more distributed workforce, with employees and employers relying on the ability to get things done wherever they are. The pandemic also shed light on the vulnerability of the older members of our community, and technology has an incredibly powerful role to play in keeping loved ones independent, safe, and well as they age. Of course, the crisis of the past year is a health crisis first and foremost, and healthcare has pushed out of the facility and into our homes in dramatic fashion. 64% of consumers in U.S. broadband households used a telehealth service in the past 12 months, up from just 15% in 2019. So the way that we care for ourselves, keep fit, and interact with the healthcare ecosystem will forever be changed. Finally, this year brought with it a major increase in residential energy bills as consumers conducted life mostly at home, and with it a rising awareness of new solutions to manage energy at home. Combined with natural disasters like fires and winter storms that knocked out power to millions of people, consumers and regulators are more aligned than ever about the value of distributed energy generation and home energy storage. We also see smart home growth occurring across new customer segments. Historically, industry players have really been focused on that single family homeowner as the target buyer segment. But interest among MDU residents is absolutely taking off. Adoption of smart home devices among MDU residents doubled in the past 2 years, coming in at 41% in Q4 2020. Of course, residents are not always the buyer. Property owners and managers have strong reasons to invest in advanced networking solutions and IoT solutions to streamline operations, increase the value of their properties, attract and retain residents, and ultimately develop new revenue streams. Parks Associates research finds that MDU renters are willing to pay an average of $18 additional rent per month for smart home related products and services such as keyless or touchless entry, touchless smart lighting controls, and remote climate control with a smart thermostat. And this equates to roughly $1.9 billion in add-on revenue opportunity annually. Finally, we're seeing smart home players increasingly target small and medium business owners. Like consumers, SMBs have come up against incredible challenges this past year and have really leaned on technology to adapt. Depending on the type of industry, SMBs have had to adjust to a remote workforce, reach customers in a new way, and rethink their on-site business operations. And so opportunities really abound to serve SMBs with the same or similar smart technologies and platforms that have been developed for residences. In particular, our research reveals that SMBs most need smart and secure networks that keep their businesses up and running and keep them connected with their employees and customers. They want to secure their businesses and keep their employees safe. They want connected solutions that help them manage their energy consumption and keep bills down. And they need partners that can help them modernize their operations. Ultimately, we see the industry making progress on some of the central issues that have limited growth to date. Interoperability initiatives are trying to solve the fragmented user experience and deliver on a smart home experience rather than a bunch of smart devices, attracting mainstream buyers with lower cost solutions, and communicating the value of the smart home in new ways that matter to consumers coming out of the COVID-19 crisis. Of course, to keep the momentum moving forward, consumers also need to know that their tech is secure. So that's our take. Over the next 2 days, we're going to hear perspectives from across the industry, starting with the CTO of Silicon Labs, Daniel Cooley. We'll be right back with Daniel and Elizabeth. Thank you.
Go on.
That was great, Jennifer.
Thanks.
Brian, I have this hat. I'm going to throw it if I feel like I need your attention. And he is going to also, he has a slide that we want to show.
Yeah, can you click ahead to that?
Yeah, during the first question. So can I start here on this side?
Yeah, I think so. And
Okay.
It takes a while to get there.
And then this is the slide he will talk about after the first.
The Connected Consumer Podcast.
Hi, my name is Rosie Alpino, and I'm one of the hosts for Parks Associates' new podcast, The Connected Consumer. This podcast is all about Parks Associates' data-driven market insights on emerging consumer technology products and services, featuring our talented analyst team and industry leaders bringing new and innovative products to the market. In this podcast, you'll get an inside look at the latest industry trends focused on the connected consumer, home automation and security, energy management, connected health, and independent living, and digital content and video services. In our very first episode, we will take a trip down memory lane through the history and evolution of Parks Associates. This year, Parks Associates is celebrating its 35th year in business and its 25th year hosting Connections, which is our signature event focused on the connected home.
The Connected Consumer Podcast. the Connected Consumer Podcast.
Thanks, Jennifer, for a great presentation. We have so much to talk about, and so let's get right to it. This is Elizabeth Parks. I'm the president of Parks Associates, and welcome to our 25th Annual Connections Conference. I am so pleased to be able to have Daniel Cooley from Silicon Labs join our virtual stage to talk about the Internet of Things and the state of the smart home. For our audience, please share your questions as soon as you have them, and we'll work them into the conversation. For your benefit today, our focus will be around the exponential growth taking place and the big deal around the Internet of Things, the smart home opportunity, and the role of technology building products, especially around privacy and security issues. And finally, the focus on the experience, interoperability, and the future for our industries. Welcome, Daniel. Thanks so much for being here, and congratulations on your recent appointment as CTO of Silicon Labs. Let's start off and take a minute and let you introduce yourself and Silicon Labs, and then we will move on to our conversation while I'll bring in that first slide. So let's go ahead and start off and hear a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you. That was certainly a pre-pandemic photo. Before we get to the slide, a little bit about Silicon Labs. We are a semiconductor company, fabless semiconductor company, and we are focused as a company on winning in the IoT. So what that means for us is we're actually selling the SoCs, the chips, the modules, and software that go in the end nodes on the network. So we interact with all the major ecosystem players and gateways and cloud, but our main customer focus is on the end nodes themselves and solving the toughest challenges that exist there. We've been focused on this for about 10 years. We consider ourselves the leader in the market, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some of our insights today with you. If we go to the first slide. I'll start here. This is a unique way for us to look at the IoT and the conditions that you need to find the exponential growth that we've been predicting for a very long time. And it's boiled down into four main categories here. And these are the conditions you need for exponential growth. So the petri dish, if you will, for the IoT. The first is ubiquitous embedded computing. What that means is that we need these embedded computers, whether they're microcontrollers or microprocessors, to be pervasive out there. And it turns out that they are. About a decade ago, the ecosystem was shipping about 6 billion microcontrollers per year, and that's now north of 15 billion today. And so these MCUs, these microprocessors, are in everything that you see. They're in you'll come across hundreds of them a day as you just go about your daily life. And devices that typically had mechanical systems or base electronics now have a lot of software running inside of them. The second is you need a desire to connect these devices to the internet. And 10 years ago, a lot of companies were thinking that they might one day need to get there, but today they now have dozens of core use cases for doing so, some of which you saw in the opening talk here. But really, they center around, in the smart home space, convenience, comfort, access, security, maintenance, business models, lifetime, insurance. We're starting to see more and more uses for the IoT technology that exists. If you can just get connected from the internet or from a phone or from a gateway to an end node device, there is some utility and some return on investment to be gleaned by doing so. The third is adoption and maturity of the internet itself, the mobile, the cloud, everything that's associated with that. The IoT can't exist by itself. It's using the infrastructure of the internet to connect data back and forth from mobile and cloud, and it's using the cloud itself to manage the Internet of Things. And of course, smartphone use is the way that most consumers interact through a phone, through a tablet, into the IoT. We're at the point now where 2 out of every 3 people on the planet are using the internet. 50% of the population uses a smartphone. And in 2019 was the first year, believe it or not, that cloud spending was actually bigger than on-prem in the data center. And so they were about the same. They were about $100 billion. But in 2020, the pandemic year, it shifted far. We saw about a 25% growth to over $125 billion in the data center the cloud, and we saw actually a reduction in on-prem data center use. So the cloud is clearly going to be the winning model there. And last, reduction in the barrier to actually connect these things. For a long time, it's been too hard, too costly, too many disciplines a company had to connect their device to a phone or to the internet. And those barriers are now coming down very, very rapidly. And that's primarily what Silicon Labs does. We make it easy to connect your devices to the internet. So these are the four conditions that we see that are starting to converge now. We have these MCUs everywhere, tons of use cases, mature technology. You can get data from anywhere to anywhere reliably, and the barriers to actually connecting the devices is starting to come down.
Well, that's great. Thanks for that vision of what's happening right now and the foundation that's gotten built over time, really creating the infrastructure for devices to connect and be integrated together. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about the past year and the pandemic and the impact on consumers at home. We've seen a blurring between work life and home life, and businesses now even paying for consumer services at home. It's really opening up new opportunities. When we look at the smart home, we've always seen that safety and security are really leading the way in terms of the value proposition and what consumers are willing to pay for. Can you share a little bit more about what Silicon Labs views as some of the most important use cases now and then looking ahead to the future?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on two big things there, the year of the pandemic, and we're still going through it, and we're not done, and history will tell us just how big it really was, but we can all tell it's pretty big. Has accelerated almost every electronic trend that existed here, and so whether you are using your home electronics for entertainment, education, safety, or otherwise, every trend has been accelerated by multiple years. So we're seeing huge demand for end devices and new use cases coming out, and very large investment, from the hyperscalers, the ecosystem drivers that are out there. So that's been very nice to see. I think the one trend during the pandemic that has maybe become the most accelerated, actually, because it was starting from a pretty low base, is health in the home. We've had a very baseline health technology in the home for a long time, with connected weigh scales or maybe a sleep monitor or a CPAP machine. But these devices that are out there are starting to grow in volume, number one, and we're starting to see much more reliance from medical infrastructure to try to get folks out of clinical settings as much as possible and care in the home where they are. So overall well-being in the home, whether you are looking at the environment you're sitting in, I saw the air quality piece come up earlier. That was really nice to see. Telehealth is a big thing, and I believe that's going to keep growing over time. I have a lot of medical professional friends who are really looking forward to, administering care where people are and only pulling them into the office when they need to be there, as opposed to being the default. So we're seeing a lot of connectivity technology being adopted in use cases that didn't even have it before, as doctors are looking to gain insights and information from consumers at home. That one's, I think, going to be particularly pronounced when the pandemic is over and still be there. The other things were there, Netflix to a TV, things like that, but this is probably the biggest one that's been accelerated.
Well, and let's touch briefly on the role of voice. So we've seen an explosion with the ownership of smart speakers. Now 49% of all households own a smart speaker, which I want to note Parks Associates categorizes as an entertainment device, not in the smart home category. But tell us a little bit about what you think voice has done for the smart home.
Oh, that's big. I mean, it was the first real killer app out there. I remember I was probably in the 2015 timeframe, and it was Amazon that was leading the way there as the first premier product. And I think it brought the smart home, literally to someone's lips at that point. For a long time, smart home technology was viewed more as science fiction and not fact. And the fact that you had a real use case that was universal, that everybody could access and talk to and use in their own way. I think that was one of the biggest things. Is most smart home applications were, a specific function, and this idea that you can talk to the machine and get answers back meant, it was whatever you needed it to be at that moment. So it became very personal, and I saw it in my family. I see it with my family in multiple languages. It can understand my kids, I can barely understand sometimes. They're pretty young, and so it's humanized a lot, and I think brought forward the market along the way. I think it took off a lot faster than people realized once it was there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that adoption rate has been quite dramatic. And despite, voice has been around really for decades now, but getting it to that right point where it worked and allows for integration with other products is really been a game changer. Let's switch the conversation a little bit and talk about building products and the role of manufacturers and looking at software and services. So can you touch upon some of the goals that Silicon Labs has in the work that you all do?
Yeah, great question. I definitely talk on that. Our goal is to make it as easy as possible to make a connected device. And that means proof of concept, design, certification, launch, and very importantly, lifecycle management. The real weight of managing tens of millions or hundreds of millions of devices hasn't been felt yet, except for a few very small organizations, the biggest ones. But that lifecycle management piece is going to get more and more important over time. So our goal is to provide the hardware and the software to make that possible. We don't make money unless our customers ship products, is the best way to think about it. And we think we're doing it better than anybody else, although there's a lot of good technology that's coming down the pipe that we haven't been able to announce yet.
Well, and there's certainly a lot of complexities in developing these kinds of products, and privacy and data security is, of course, at the forefront of hopefully all manufacturers and service providers' minds. It is at the top of mind for consumers. Can you share a little bit more about how you all are addressing privacy and data, and maybe touch upon some of the regulations that we're seeing coming down and how that's going to impact the market moving forward?
That's a great topic, and one that we're thrilled to be seeing, frankly. The IoT has been a pretty insecure place for a very long time, much less secure than your mobile phone or the other major computing platforms. So there's a lot of chess pieces on the board that are lining up now for making major advances in protecting IP and data in the IoT. And this is not just coming from the government; it's coming from the technology suppliers themselves. And our customers have been wanting it for a long time, and frankly have the end consumers. But the IoT was so fragmented, and the computing platform that it runs on was so fundamentally different than security in a phone or a PC that we really had to invent a lot of new stuff to get there. So we're starting to see now government bodies, NIST, ETSI, governments themselves, the U.S. government, the federal government, the EU, and at lower levels too, individual countries and states within the U.S. also legislating down security requirements that have real teeth to them. You want to know that the device you purchase isn't going to be easily hacked or leaking information. And selfishly, the supply chain also needs to know that their IP is being protected along the way. There's a lot of IP being put into these devices, and a lot more coming, especially as machine learning takes off. And our customers want to see a lot of hooks in place to make sure that doesn't get lifted very easily. So a specific recent government action, I think it was just last week, the Biden administration issued an executive order around this, and this was related to cybersecurity attack on the pipeline in the eastern U.S. We're starting to see more and more and more of these kind of events that are threatening critical infrastructure. It's one thing to have a website go down. That could be an annoyance, or maybe a bigger deal if it's a bank or something. But when the real world starts to get touched and impacted, whether it's infrastructure, service delivery, or transportation or something like that, there's real risk out there. And fortunately, we have the tools in place to be able to address it. And we're going to start to see a lot more protection going forward.
Well, that's great, and certainly a lot of vulnerabilities out there for the industry to work, and consumers, I think, will still be paying a lot of attention to that issue. I'm going to change gears here. I've got a question from our audience I want to bring in. So here it is. How broadly do you believe that Apple's AirTags will be for widening the mainstream appeal of tracker solutions, as it's essentially an affordable, heavy, lightweight IoT device? Is this a watershed solution that will open up the market for new devices?
Great question. I mean, nothing moves the needle in some cases like Apple, especially in the consumer space. I've got, honestly, right in front of me, multiple of these things. I'm figuring out how to use them right now. And it's not new, like many things Apple has done. They rarely pioneer a new segment. They typically wait for a segment to be ripe for their kind of innovation, and then they go after it with full press. Like the tile tags have been around a long time, and the AirTags, many years later are coming out. Is this watershed? I hope so. Where's my stuff is one of the biggest questions to answer in the world. Whether you're a consumer or you're in commercial retail applications, where's my stuff? It is a really big one, and to have secure, low-cost ways to address that is a killer app in the IoT, frankly. And there's going to be lots of different technologies to solve it, but I hope that we are able to answer that question pretty simply. I'm tired of looking for my things, that's for sure. And my kids are asking me to put them in their backpacks now. I'm like, I'm not quite ready to go that far yet, but we'll see. And so from that perspective, yes, I hope so. I hope that an organization like Apple that takes consumer privacy and data very seriously, pioneers where this is going, and they have a lot of really unique things to address it. I mean, I'm not trying to give a commercial for Apple right now, but one thing I was very impressed by was that if a tag stops moving for a certain period of time and it's out of your possession, you get notifications around that, or you don't want someone tracking you as a person. They have a lot of things built upon answering the question, where's my stuff? So I hope so.
Well, that's great, and that will be interesting to watch. I want to get back and talking about the consumer experience and interoperability. We've heard some big announcements from the Zigbee Alliance, now the Connectivity Standards Alliance, and the rebranding name change for the CHIP initiative, now called Matter. So lots of great promises and a vision for a seamless connected home and end user experience. So would love to hear more about what you think about these developments focused on interoperability.
I'm super excited about it, to be honest. Interop is one of the gating items to the IoT's growth right now. Frankly, it's one of the hardest problems to solve, actually. And you'll have a panel talking later today with people that are way more into the details on it. But at the highest level, the CSA was created out of recognition that no one standard is winning in the IoT. You have Zigbee and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and Z-Wave and many others out there. We need a way for higher levels of interoperability to come together. In the cloud, in the gateway, security models that are consistent across them. And I was talking with somebody earlier today about it. And I mean, the main idea is if you are switching your smart home platform, maybe from a Google to an Apple platform, you don't want to have to buy a new door lock for your house or a new thermostat. That would be a non-starter. So having higher levels of interoperability and ways of working is super important. And the creation of the CSA and is a recognition of that, and Matter as a standard itself, it's a great IP-based mesh networking protocol here, and fundamentally I do believe that there is a place for those kind of protocols in the IoT world. There's a lot of reliability you get, so very excited about it. Can't wait to see products shipping at the end of the year on Matter specifically, and also to see where the CSA takes the IoT going forward.
Well, that's great, and it is a huge initiative, and certainly interoperability has been at the heart of the conversation that we've been having at Connections the past 25 years. So it'll be great if somebody can solve that issue for the consumer. And as we know, it is all about the experience, and if it doesn't work or things aren't connected easily and seamlessly, you're gonna lose a buyer there.
Yep.
So thank you for that comment. And let's talk just a little bit about the future. We've got the near term, the now, and the short term, the 3 years, and then the 10 years out. But 10 years is a long way off to predict the future. But tell me what you might be seeing here in the next 18 months to 3 years specifically for the smart home space and the consumer technology side.
That's a great question. I spent a lot of my time thinking over those time frames. So I believe that every class of product, electronic product in the home, and most products are electronic products at this point, whether you realize it or not. Your toaster has an MCU inside of it. Most electronic products are going to have to have major pieces of their product line be connected. The idea that a product will be connected, maybe, or in rare use cases, is going to go away, and more of the products will be connected to a smart home ecosystem or the internet itself than not on a go-forward basis. It doesn't mean you're going to have screens on your refrigerators, but it may mean that your smart home system will want to know if your refrigerator pump is about to break, or if the water filter needs to be replaced, which happens a lot in my house. I go far too long. And so the companies that are building, I don't even want to say smart products, just products, are going to have to get used to this technology. And the ones that adopt it the best and the most scalable and make it easiest to use for the consumers will thrive. And the ones that don't, I don't know if their businesses are going to be sustainable over a long-term time frame. At least not the largest ones. So you either figure out how to use this technology or not. And an example that I was giving somebody the other day, the manufacturing ecosystem changed a lot from the mid 80s in the US to today. Over the last 40 years, manufacturing, you had to adopt to a world of a global manufacturing strategy, where to build things, where to source things, how to transport them, and so on. The companies that adopted that, are thriving today. The ones that didn't went out of business. And I see that going forward for the IoT. It's not going to play out much different than that. You either adopt this technology and figure out how to use it to deliver value for your customers, or you may not make it. And I think the winners are being selected right now. In 3 years or 4 or 5 years from now, we'll start to see that play out.
Well, I think you're right. Anything that can be connected and that ends up with operational value or experience value is going to get connected. So, Daniel, that will have to be the last word. I want to thank you again for your time today and joining us and sharing your perspectives. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was a good talk.
Great. And next, we are going to move on, and we will be hearing from Vicki Rogers from Cox Communities alongside Patrice Samuels, our senior analyst in the smart home space. Thanks for watching.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Executive Spotlight segment. I am Patrice Samuels, and joining me is Vicki Rogers from Cox Communities. Vicki is the Vice President at Cox Communities, and her team is focused on innovation, partnerships, and growth. So let me just kick it off with Vicki telling us a little bit more, or just helping to give us a better understanding of Cox Communities, because we're all familiar with Cox Communications. They've been a leader in the broadband space for a very long time. But help us to understand Cox Communities and how that division sort of fits into the smart home space.
Absolutely. So Cox Communities has several segments. We have strategy, and that team actually looks at the external landscape to understand what growth opportunities are there and what risks are coming down the pike. Then we have operational enablement. Those are the folks that have the tools and processes, reporting and analytics, and all the sales support, including sales engineering support and order management. And then we have the third segment, which is our sales organization, so sales execution. And that includes a national team that does new build, that works with our key builders, both on the SFU, which is single family unit, or multifamily space. We also are putting together a national accounts team and a national accounts program so that we can co-create solutions with our customers and really proactively educate and have our customers sit at the table from a steering committee perspective. And then we have the field sales organizations out in each of our regions. And so what our team does is we work closely with builders, developers, owners, and consultants. And we leverage consumer research to understand how we support them in really driving rents and occupancy through technology. And so we have our own product roadmap for the builder and multifamily space. And we've really launched some innovative products that have really been a synergistic win between owners, consumers, and COGS. So we're really excited about this team. We're certainly one of the growth engines for the residential space, and we're excited about our future.
Great. So it sounds like then a major part of what you do is being sort of a consultant to those two industries that you mentioned, the builders and the property managers, being a consultant and letting them know how technology can really benefit them, benefit their organization, and sort of drive growth. And that was very interesting to me. As you can tell, it stood out for me because one of the things that we became acutely aware of when we just started looking into the smart home space was that people just didn't understand. I mean, people want the benefits of technologies. They know they need help. They know they're not operating at the highest level of efficiency that they can operate at, but they just don't understand which technologies can help them. And even if they're aware of smart home technologies, they don't know exactly, how to get those up and running, what products will help them to do different things. So I'm really excited about having companies who are serving this role as an advisor to these groups in the space that will really help to, just help to push the smart home market forward and drive appeal of the products among these different groups. So great. All right. So
absolutely. I was going to say, just to dovetail of what you said, I mean, this is a complex space and it's moving very rapidly. And so to have someone be able to work with you to understand what's current state, what's future state, and what's the best path to get there is really important.
Exactly. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the smart home market in general. Now, we heard Jennifer's presentation earlier where she talks about just how the market is evolving, and certainly what we know is that it has been growing. I mean, we're seeing now where at least 34% of broadband households are reporting that they own at least one of the smart home devices that we cover, and this is up from only 17% in 2016. So we are seeing that there's growth there happening consistently. So do you have any thoughts on, just what are the key drivers that are helping to enable or facilitate this growth?
I think more and more people are just getting more comfortable with digital automation and what that means. And, I think it's just becoming more of our core day to day. I was just thinking about, 10 or 15 years ago, how we would do certain things versus how we do it now, right? And so I think adoption from that perspective is people are just more comfortable. I think, secondly, if you think about the demographics out there, the millennials, we keep thinking of the millennials as the younger set, but the millennials now are up to age 39, and they're doing a lot of household formation. A lot of that segment got married later on, having children a little bit later. But now, they're starting to be a bigger portion of new build homes purchasing. They're getting out of their parents' basement and starting their own households. And so the millennials have more of a propensity to want smart home features and automation. And we've done a lot of joint research with some of our larger customers. And what we found is when people are choosing where they're going to live from an apartment choice perspective, all things being equal, smart home automation really drives up rents and occupancy. So that millennial segment is willing to pay a pretty substantial increase in rent to have a fully automated home that they don't have to worry about themselves, that they're not having to buy all the piece parts or do the do-it-yourself kind of version.
Yeah, I'm certainly hearing a lot of information around that too, and seeing some data, just comparing how important some of the traditional amenities, such as, covered parking and, having that common area with a gym or pool. And we're seeing where smart home automation is really stacking up against some of the traditionally high ranking amenities such as covered parking, as probably now, outweighed or surpassed things like pools and gyms and stuff like that, having those in an apartment. So we're certainly seeing it from our point of view, from the data, that this is something that's growing in importance. So that's a good segue for us to kind of hone in on the MDU space and that market, really, as we just talked about, and how important it is for the growth of the smart home market in general. Because I'm trying to get some context, because we know that it's going to play an important role, but just how important is it necessary to get us across that chasm that we consistently talk about? Is it just going to add sort of negligible growth in the space? I'm just trying to get you to help me to put it in context about just how much this space can help drive the smart home market forward, or just how important this space is going to be for smart home products.
Well, I think, first of all, if you think about households globally, multifamily represents about 34% of all passings in the U.S. So it's a substantial chunk of our consumers out there. Historically, if you think about it, if you were just renting, your likelihood of really buying all these devices, thermostat, et cetera, locks, you're not going to do that in an apartment. And so part of probably what was the holdback is, if you're renting versus owning, you may not want to buy all those devices and put them in, or you may not be allowed to by your landlord. However, I think where you're going to see this sort of flip is with the new IoT technology and cloud-based solutions. Really, a lot of the processes or things that you can do with smart home solutions benefit both the landlord and the resident. And so with the new technology out there, where the resident can be in control when they're in their home, but when they move out of the apartment, the property manager can take control back. Suddenly you introduce a whole new flavor of being able to be more efficient with your operational processes, driving costs out of the business, and then also having just a better resident journey and experience and a more frictionless process for the resident as they're leasing an apartment, moving in, and going through those processes. And so I think what you're going to find in that multifamily space is the whole building will just get lit up at one time and pre-enabled with smart home devices, and the owners are going to put the capital into the building and then just put it as part of one of the amenities in the rent.
Yeah, so what I'm getting from you is that it's going to be an important space, considering it makes up 34% of MDUs in general, make up 34% of residences in the US. But more importantly will be those MDU rentals, because that is where, smart home product manufacturers can really drive sales at scale, really, because they get to sell, they're lighting up the whole property with these products. So it's a much easier sale than if you're to try to sell individual homeowners a one-off product. So that makes that market important. So speaking of, and I know this probably applies more to the MDU owner side of the market, where the owners are seeking to get the products themselves, but it does apply to the MDU renters segment as well. So in the past, right, when we're talking about adoption of smart home devices, of course, a lot of that adoption was in the single family space. And it just highlights some of the things you were saying earlier, that, some renters just weren't allowed to install these products on their own. A lot of times it required wiring, and they just weren't allowed to make those changes to the facility that they were renting, and just things like that just often prohibited these customers from MDU renters from purchasing the products, right? So I know that a lot of device manufacturers now are looking into this market for reasons that you mentioned, that not only to sell to the property managers directly, but also just getting more out of the MDU space in general to help drive product sales. But I mean, do you think that they have done the work to have these products evolve in ways that can better fit this market segment? Is there less wiring requirements now, or things like that, which will make the products more appropriate or suitable for MDU owners who want to purchase these products themselves, or MDU renters who want to purchase these products themselves and not go through a property manager?
Well, I think what you'll see is folks like us, right? Like Cox Community stepping in and assessing the building, depending on the building setup, understand from the owner what they're trying to accomplish and what their priorities are, and helping put together the connectivity solutions, because there's many different routes of how you can connect IoT solutions. You need to have an always on data solution for it to work effectively. And so what is that network solution? What are the array of devices that you want, and what's most important to you? I mean, you look at leak detection, thermostat control, digital door locks. There's a lot of variety of how you could set it up and what's going to be most important, and understanding your return on investment. And then someone to come in and integrate that, especially in a brownfield. If it's a new build, it's probably a little easier because you come in and it's part of your new build capital construction and it all gets done at one time. But if it's a brownfield, you got to make sure someone can come in, assess the building, understand the wiring options, integrate everything in, and then do the proactive monitoring. And so I think what will happen more in these large portfolios or large properties is you'll have someone act as that integrator. And so that as a Cox Communities team, that's part of what we do, is we would come in, assess everything, look at the before, propose the after, implement, and then manage. And so I would say on these big portfolios, the device folks will go through the larger integrators, and then, we'll have a set supply chain of what that forecast is and how that works. And so I think it's just an indirect sales model versus a direct to consumer model in a lot of that area.
Yeah.
Not that you won't have both, right? You'll have some of both, but I think more and more you're going to see buildings being pre-enabled up front.
Pre-enabled to accommodate. So if I rent an apartment and I want a smart thermostat, these thermostats, the buildings are going to be designed to easily accommodate residents who want to install a smart thermostat on their own, regardless of whether or not that property is providing smart thermostats to its residents.
Well, I think, as a renter, if sustainability is important to me and, doing the right thing, then you're going to ask those questions, right? And so you're probably going to be more drawn to rent an apartment that you consider a green apartment, that manages thermostat control. There's other things that you can monitor for that would be important to you. But yeah, I'm more likely to rent that. And so I think the key drivers will be the finance, which is a lot of times what the key driver is, right? That you're going to have a better net operating income in an apartment that has a smart thermostat, because the people coming in to rent it are going to want to know that they can, turn it down or up when they're not there, and not waste electricity or other things. But yeah. And save on their bills too, right? So
no, exactly. All of the above. And I liked your point earlier that, that's probably going to factor into their decisions up front. So that will, give the property a competitive advantage, whether or not they actually either provide these products or their apartments are enabled to accommodate those products. So I think that's very important and a very good point. Now let's talk about some of the challenges, because I know that this is a space that everyone is trying to get into, but there have been legitimate challenges that have prevented widespread adoption of these products. One of them initially was having to rely on consumers' broadband. So if I have to rely on my residents' broadband to, accommodate my smart home products that I'm offering to the residents, then I can see where that complicates things a little bit. So, not everybody has the same broadband service. That's going to create different user experiences for different residents. So can you talk a little bit about how brands are both navigating that space? Just, how are they overcoming those challenges, and what's the best way to get past the whole broadband connectivity being the backbone of the service and relying on residents' broadband?
Well, first of all, I mean, broadband is the foundation, right? And so if you don't have good broadband or consistency in your network, you're going to have a poor experience on smart devices because they just won't work.
Yeah.
But as you were saying, there's many different connectivity options. So some people use cellular or LTE. We're about to launch something that we're trialing in Phoenix right now that we call an always-on network. So the resident could have their own retail broadband in place, but we'll have a secondary network that will allow all the IoT devices to stay on all the time, whether someone's moving in, moving out. It's not going to rely on that in-residence broadband. And that's a pretty inexpensive way of using the infrastructure that's already in the building and still having something that's always on and reliable. A third option is just traditional bulk data, right? So you just go to your MSO or your provider and you bulk data solutions for the whole building for each passing. You pay X dollars per month and you have a modem in there and you've got an always-on solution for the IoT. And then the fourth option obviously is managed Wi-Fi, which managed Wi-Fi has some good features, but it's also pretty capital intensive. So if you're a building owner, you're probably going to end up paying anywhere from $600 to $1,000 a door if you do a 1-to-1 ratio. And if you want good quality, you probably want a 1-to-1 ratio of APs to apartments. The other thing you got to think about is if you're an owner, with music rights and other things, with DCMA laws, you want to be able to shut down an end user if they're doing something illegal on the broadband. And so it's pretty important that you understand who's got what liabilities, who's managing that process, and that you can identify if there's any inappropriate use of content via the broadband. So those are 4 options, and there's pros and cons to each, right? LTE and cellular works, but it's sometimes spotty and not so good. Always on is a good solution. It's not fully rolled out as a product yet. Bulk data, that works. There's pros and cons to that. And then managed Wi-Fi is just very capital intensive. And so just weighing those out.
So the bottom line, it seems like, is that it's best to have a dedicated sort of broadband network or connectivity network then for the smart home products and not be relying at all on resident broadband.
Well, if you're the end consumer and you're buying it, obviously you're going to put it on your broadband most likely. But if you're a building and you want to be able to control the building through IoT solutions and have notices for leak detection, or if you want digital door locks, or you want thermostat control that can be controlled at the property level as well as the in-resident level, then yeah, you've got to have an always-on data network. And you don't depend on the end user's network, because if they unplug their device or something happens or it gets turned down or they're moving in and moving out, suddenly you're going to have these hubs offline. And you're going to have all these devices up and down, and you're going to think you've got a problem when you don't. And so it's just easier to have a secondary always-on network if you can.
That's a very important point. I didn't think of that if the resident leaves and ends their service, then that actually minimizes the data that the property manager is getting from that.
Right.
So that's very interesting. As I said, it's a complicated space. So that's a good segue to the next question, because I wanted to find out, I'm acutely aware of the broadband challenges in the space, but what other challenges are there that we should be thinking about if we're thinking of either selling these platforms to multifamily properties, or I'm a device manufacturer trying to offer in this space? What other challenges should I prepare for?
Well, the other thing to think about is, you have all these devices, you have all these IoT signals. You typically would have a hub, right? And then you've got the broadband. If you're getting broadband from one organization and you're doing the IoT deployment or the smart devices deployment with someone else, then who's proactively monitoring and telling you where the issues are, right? So if you have a device issue, or if you see something that looks like it's offline or down, is that a broadband issue? Is it a fiber cut? Is the broadband down? Or is it a performance issue? Or is it the device? And then who's the go-between on that, right? And so that's the reason we felt like it's better to integrate it and have one solution that can be proactively monitored. So you can tell if it's a network connection issue, if you've got a device failure, if you've got a low battery, what are the things that are causing the alarms, and that someone's proactively managing that for you. So as a property, it's not wearing you out, right? Like, oh my gosh, this isn't working. Why is it not working? Is it the broadband? Is it the device? Is it the signal? Is it the way we've got them set up, right? So there's a lot of complexity to the management of it, especially when you have people with significant number of devices. Think about it. Most of our homes now look like what small businesses used to look like years ago. That's right. And so it becomes pretty complex. And so making sure that all that's integrated and you have rules for how you determine when you're alarming something and what can be handled remotely versus having to roll a truck to repair something it's a big deal, because it's gonna make a difference on what your resident experience is and whether that experience becomes something that retains your customers long-term and makes them happy, or whether they're just frustrated because they feel like it never quite works right.
No, I mean, that's a very important point, because I was talking to a property manager recently just about bulk broadband services. And she said that's a hard no for her. Like, they're not doing that primarily because they do not want to have to address, they just don't feel they have the bandwidth to address all the technical issues that might present. So I can imagine that with broadband plus additional technologies such as smart home technology, that would be an additional challenge for any property manager trying to get into the space. So very important point. But one other thing I wanted to look at are the privacy issues, because I know that in talking to people in the space, just a few months ago, privacy was still an issue because the residents, and not necessarily on the property manager side of things, just getting residents to, understand that these products are beneficial and it's not the property manager's way of trying to intervene or get insight basically on what they're doing and how they're using the apartment. So, just things like a smart door lock, I can see how a resident might be concerned that data about, how much they enter and leave their homes might be going to the property manager as well, and nobody wants the property manager to have that much insight into what they're doing on a daily basis. So just trying to find out, is privacy still a concern in this space?
It's funny. I would honestly, and I'm a little bit older, but I'm surprised people don't have more concerns sometimes about all the data. But what we find is most people, if it gives them convenience and makes their day better, they're usually pretty open to using the data if you explain what the data is used for. And I'll give you an example. So the thermostats, right? If you think about next generation, what you really could do is say, hey, here's your electricity usage in your apartment. Here are 3 ways that you could lower your bill, right? And so that's using artificial intelligence to share back with the residents so that they can take an action that helps them, right? We're pretty careful as a company that, we get permission from anyone before we use any data. And obviously, any of that data usage would be not usually at the individual level. It's usually more of a thing of being able to do certain things that would help that end user. And so we're pretty careful about that overall. The other thing you got to think about, though, with smart home is just security, right? There's a lot of hackers out there. I mean, you just saw what happened to Colonial Pipeline, right? And so we do a tremendous amount of security testing and pen testing on all the stuff that we do to make sure that, we've done as much as we can to, protect. But if you think about it, you're talking about the digital door lock, but an apartment building has a key to every apartment anyway. And so, from an access perspective, it's
Right.
It is what it is.
Right. No, totally agreed. And speaking, I guess communicating that level of security then, and the fact that, you guys are very careful about data and, just communicating that to the resident is what I think is probably going to be important for them to embrace these products and minimize the concerns that will in turn have a property manager, less willing to adopt these products and provide them to their residents. Now, speaking of embracing smart home technology, do you think COVID-19 has had any impact at all on the space and their willingness to adopt these technologies?
I do on a couple fronts. I think this was kind of walking along and people knew that eventually they needed to do more digital enablement. I think COVID caused it to go faster. And the reason I say that is, they were having to do a lot of remote stuff. And so being able to show apartments remotely became important. So having those digital door locks where someone could go onto a website, fill out the stuff and get a code to come into the apartment without having to have someone there with them became important. And so that became a development. And it's a feature a lot of folks like. And, a lot of people come and see apartments after hours, because their schedules just don't fit into the normal timing. The other thing that's happening is, getting employees is really tough right now. The job market, a lot of folks are taking unemployment and staying home, or there's other reasons they're not in the job market. And so being able to keep enough maintenance staff or enough leasing staff has really put a strain on the resources they have. And so the more that you can automate those processes, so that if I have a painter that's coming in, I can just remotely give them a code so they can get in there for 2 hours and do the painting. So I'm flipping the apartment. Or if someone has a package delivery, instead of me having the leasing agent have to hold it and find the resident and get it to them, that we could give them access. They could open the door for 10 minutes and drop the package at the front door, or, any of those kind of things. There's just a lot of convenience things that really drive man hours out of the business and help you be able to run a building with fewer staff, because some of these staff are, they have a lot of load on them right now, which is all that's going on, because you may not have as big a maintenance crew. You may not have as big a leasing staff crew right now.
Yeah, and the excess burden might further exacerbate the problem, because that might create some turnover that leads to an even smaller workforce. So I can see that happening. But I want to wrap this up by looking forward a little bit and trying to find out what you see, or your perspective, or the perspectives of Cox communities, really, on what the next phase of the smart home will look like. So any thoughts you have, just want to look out a little bit to find out, to assess what we should be thinking about as we all try to embrace this product in this market.
Yeah, I truly think that people will pre-enable buildings, as I said. And so every apartment will be pre-enabled with that. Smart thermostat, digital door locks, water sensors, HVAC sensors, and other things that make it easier, right? And so you're going to come in, you're going to first look at your apartment online, right? Because 95% of people check out an apartment online before they come to see. And so you're going to go online, you're going to say, does this apartment have the technology that I want to live in? And so you're going to select or deselect where you're going to go look based on the technology package that's there. Then you're probably going to do a remote tour, right, that you've booked online, and it's going to self-serve and let you come in and take a look at it. Then you're going to do a digital lease. When your lease is approved, then it's going to come in the system. It's going to say, welcome to your new apartment. Here are the options of which you can pre-enable if you wish, right? Here's the features of your apartment that you can turn on. So you can pre-enable those from your iPhone. You move in. It's a frictionless journey for you. You don't have to wait half a day for a truck roll for broadband, because it's already going to be lit up. And it's going to drive operational expense out of the business for the owner. It's going to make the resident more comfortable and happy as they come in. They're going to get higher speed data. They're going to have better solutions. And then I think eventually what's going to happen is we'll have spatial interaction, talking about that data piece, right? Where artificial intelligence will take the information you've got, know your preferences, and you'll have your own preferences set. And then it's going to interact with data outside of your door, right? So smart city information, or smart cars, or other things eventually that will be out there, to where that information can exchange, and it can choose your preferences. If you go to Starbucks every morning and you want, XYZ, it could pre-put in your order. There's many things that could go from here. Obviously that's a little bit in the future, but we're getting pretty dependent on all our automated devices. Think about how much you use your iPhone for everything and all the apps you have on there. And if you lose your phone, what a big deal it is not to be able to do all that. And so in my mind, that's where it goes. At first, I think you light up the building and you have automated processes in and out. When you move in, your back end property management system knows someone's in the apartment and you control it. When you move out, the control goes back to the property manager, right? And so, and then from there, you start connecting with things outside of your building.
Your data comes with you. All right, well, that's all the time we have, Vicki. Unfortunately, this was certainly a very interesting conversation. I think you've really highlighted some of the core and most important things that we need to be thinking about as we try to, expand the smart home market or dive deeper into the MDU space. So really appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much for making the time, and we definitely look forward to seeing what else Cox Communities has in store. So we'll be looking out for that. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrice.
All right, have a good day.
Bye.
Vicki, Patrice, great conversation. Really interesting to see what's happening in the MDU markets. I'm so excited to kick off this full interactive panel with all of our great industry speakers. So let me invite them into our conversation. We're going to start with having each of them introduce themselves, introduce their companies, and tell us a little bit about their role at their organizations before we dive into our discussion. So first, I'd like to start with Jake Alamat. Jake is the VP and GM of Home and Life at Silicon Labs. Hi, Jake.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jake Alamat. I work for Silicon Labs. We are a leading provider of the enabling secure wireless technologies that help enable IoT device makers and ecosystem providers deploy smart home and IoT equipment within Silicon Labs. I manage the Home and Life business. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks, Jake, for being here. Next, I'd like to introduce Alice DiBiasio, who's a VP of Global Product Management and Security at Residio. Hi, Alice.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for having me. Residio is a whole home provider of products for the home's most critical networks. We're a recent spin-off back in 2018, controls in more than 150 million homes and 6.7 million connected customers. What we do is we focus on 4 critical networks within the home. And I was excited to hear some of the panelists speak about each one of these, right? But the first one, air, right? Offering the broadest line of connected and non-connected thermostats, indoor air quality, humidification, dehumidification, zoning. Our second network is water. We cover hydronic heating solutions, which is common in Europe in the Northeast, where I am, potable water controls, backflow preventers, water leak detection. The third network being energy. These are typically used in homeowners' safe operations of water heaters, boilers, furnaces, heat pumps. We kind of view it where your luggage is typically stored in a basement or one of those types of areas. And then lastly, security, which I'm the Vice President Global Product Management, and that's really more around platforms that bring together all of the smart home with great partnerships and a network of professionals really across Americas and Europe. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being here, Alice. Next, we have Ann Ferguson, who's the VP of Marketing at Alarm.com. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Jennifer. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity, and congratulations to Parks on another fantastic Connections event. I am with Alarm.com. We are the leading provider for home and business smart solutions. We started with security about 20 years ago and have been consistently adding to the portfolio of offerings, both domestically and globally. We're now in 44 countries internationally as well. I'm responsible for marketing here at the company, which includes sort of the traditional marketing functions one might think of, but also critically important to us, our partner marketing function, which is all about ensuring that our go-to-market service providers have got all the tools and resources they need to effectively sell, support, maintain, and grow subscriber relations.
Great. Thank you, Ann. Thanks for that compliment. Thanks for being back with us. Next, we have Dave Ilardi, who's the General Manager of Allegiant Home at Allegiant. Hi, Dave.
Hey, everyone. Thank you again for the opportunity to join the panel today. As was mentioned, I'm Dave Ilardi, and I lead the Schlage residential business for Allegiant in the Americas. And as many of you know the brand, we have been really trusted in over 40 million homes across the U.S. and Canada, and really have been really at the forefront of trying to drive some acceleration on smart home products, especially with our door locks. And really, we offer a range of smart locks that both serve the single family as well as what is the major growth that we've seen in the multifamily markets, especially in this last 5 to 10 years. So we really do this through earning a lot of trust in our brand. We've been doing it for over 100 years in the lock category. And really, that's what our consumers and many of the ecosystem partners that are on this call that work with us really trust and really want to work with us in that way. And that's really I'm looking forward to our discussion today, because we see a lot of opportunity to continue that acceleration. So thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Great to have your perspective and Allegion's perspective on the state of the smart home today. Next, we have Michelle Turner, who is the Senior Director of Product Management, Smart Home Ecosystem at Google Nest with the Google Thread Group. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, everybody. I think I have the longest title on here. It's not normally that long. I lead the smart home platform and ecosystem for Google, and my team works to build really great smart home experiences with our partners, like many of my colleagues on this panel. And we also work on standards efforts such as Thread and Matter. Our goal is to create great experiences for consumers so that we can continue to see the robust growth in this the smart home space, and also to help smart device makers grow their businesses. And some of the stuff that Daniel was saying earlier about Matter and how we'll see the growth coming out of that is really exciting, and looking forward to discussing that more. So, that's it. Looking forward to the panel.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Looking forward to your thoughts on Matter and all these other topics as well today. And finally, we have Jana Welander, who's the CEO of Craftful. Excuse me. Jana, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Craftful?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Really excited to participate in this 25th anniversary of Connections. Jana Welander, I'm CEO and co-founder of Craftful. At Craftful, we're building the software layer for the physical world, essentially to help hardware companies launch usable and therefore useful connected products. And really excited to join this panel.
Awesome. Well, again, I'm so excited about all of you speakers today. Really great, fantastic lineup, and we appreciate your participation. So first, we're going to go to Anne and Jake. You all heard our take on the state of the smart home, right? Where we're at in sort of this pivotal moment out of a really impactful and transitional year. I'd love to understand how you would characterize this moment for the smart home, and we can start with you.
Sure. Well, Jennifer, I would just echo a lot of the comments that you referenced earlier. Certainly the data that you presented is what we're experiencing as well. And we find going into 2021 and hopefully even coming out of it, we're in a very, very strong position collectively, as I think the pandemic really just fueled this convergence of security and smart home that had been happening organically for a long time. And what's happened is, as people were in their homes, we really started to see people thinking differently about security. So it transitioned from being just around perimeter protection, which is what it had been for such a long time, to really people thinking about security in a much more holistic way. So security became, for example, who is coming in my door? Maybe a welcome person coming in the front door, but I want to be able to see that person. I want to be able to control that front door experience, because for a long time, we didn't want people, even friends, coming in our front doors. So, you look at the explosion of the doorbell camera as a device, for example. Very similarly, we saw a real increase in the use of indoor video as well. And certainly, I think for me personally, I had several use cases where that became just invaluable. I had children that were upstairs, supposedly in school, right, while I'm trying to work downstairs. So having that indoor camera to be able to peek in on them, make sure that they're doing okay, to be able to quickly talk to them, remind them that, no, it's not lunchtime quite yet, really was something that I never could have envisioned being as valuable as it has turned out to be. And similarly, we've seen many, many cases where it's the smart home technology has allowed individuals to stay connected with, in particular, elderly members of their family who might not have been residing with them. And that degree of connection and being able to ensure that those elderly members of the family stayed protected throughout the last year, again, has just become something that people, I think, will not give up anytime soon. And it will cause them to continue to look for smart home and security solutions to further are some of the positive experiences that we're all carrying out of the pandemic.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the core value propositions leading into this year for smart home is that you could remotely access and control your home and really view from the outside in what was going on. And then we are all home all the time. And so you actually lose that value proposition. Some of what you're speaking to is more of an inside out view, or what's, more of a focus on internal.
Yeah, absolutely. But then as we start to transition to being out of our homes even more, I think having that connection back to home is going to be more meaningful than ever. I got, as many of us did, I got used to seeing my children every single day. And now when I'm in the office as I am today, I still want to be able to see when they come in the door from school today, and to make sure that, it's just them and not them and 3 of their closest friends, because we're not there quite yet.
Right. Awesome. Well, Jake, let me turn to you as well. How would you characterize this moment for the smart home?
I largely agree with the comments made earlier in this summit, as well as what Ann said. We've seen a huge explosion from an adoption perspective on smart home products and IoT products in general. You see most folks looking at, how do I save time? How do I save money? How do I stay more secure while they're at home with their families and doing things? And it's, you'd think the remote use cases are a big part of that, but it's because they're home and they see these things that make it easier to manage their lives and make them feel safer, save them some money, that it's driving a significant amount of adoption across almost all categories. And beyond the smart home too, from home automation, you're seeing an explosion in medical monitoring devices as well. People are really focusing on their health and how can they make that better. And that adoption, because of the big acceleration, it's driving the market to accelerate how it's innovating in its use cases, in making sure that there's strong security, in making sure that we've got solid interoperability between products and product lines. So I'm super excited, not only about the increase in adoption that we've all been talking about and looking forward for the last 5 to 10 years, but also in what it's doing to drive innovation across the IoT platforms that exist and the devices and use cases that are out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your colleague at Silicon Labs, Daniel, earlier mentioned health as well, really as one of those big use cases that he sees, particularly accelerated. We're seeing the same thing. Is there any, it's a huge umbrella, right? Underneath, we might fit something like senior assistive technologies, as well as telehealth services, remote patient monitoring, fitness solutions, right? Is there anything within the connected health sort of use case broadly that you're seeing particularly strongly, or just sort of across the board?
Yeah, there's a lot of elder care and aging in place stuff that's starting to come up. What we've seen a big jump in terms of just demand we've seen from the market is around things like pulse oximeters, blood pressure monitors. There's a big explosion in diabetes care products, so kind of ongoing care and disposables, and then even personal kind of care products. We've seen big increases as well. So it's across the board, mainly on the diagnostic side, and I think the elder care stuff it is developing momentum, but I think that's just now starting to grow.
Yeah. Well, I really want to pick up on this idea of new use cases coming out of the pandemic, right? That may have changed because our lives have changed, how we work has changed. And I'd love to let the audience know, if you haven't noticed, there is a polling tab in your event platform. And so one of the questions we have to you for all of our participants today is, what use case represents the strongest opportunity coming out of COVID-19? And so we'll give them a chance to answer while I kick this to our panel as well. And I'm going to come to Alice and Yana here. So what are some of the more interesting smart home use cases that you're seeing today that maybe weren't as strong 12, 18 months ago, or are maybe even just accelerating further? Alice, can we start with you?
Sure. I'll touch on 3, although everyone's kind of alluded to each one. The first one was telehealth. as part of our security portfolio, we have a life care solutions offering. And what this really focused on last year is keeping patients that do have chronic illnesses in the safety and security of their home. Everyone was, trying to seek shelter and so forth in their homes. This also provided two things, right? Making sure that that person and that family is protected, but more importantly also is at a time when there was such uncertainty and individuals were sick, right, flocking with the virus to these local hospitals, clinics, and so forth. It actually allowed them to prioritize, right? Our first responder community, which has been amazing, partners of ours, right? And making sure that they could prioritize those individuals that needed the care, that needed the equipment, and so forth in those. So that was sort of use case number one that everyone's kind of touched on. Second one was video. It's amazing, right? When you don't have social interaction, it creates a lot of stress, anxiety, family members, right? Being able to check in on those when you could have went over there in a weekend or in the middle of the week, right? Now you don't have that luxury. And many of these are elders, many of these are families, young families, right? I would say myself, right? A 9 and a 6-year-olds. That was some stressful times at that point. But you're able to see facial social interaction, right? As human beings, that's what we thrive on, right? So definitely video across the board. The third use case, though, I have to say, I'm big shout out to our community of contractors. We saw as businesses were being shut down, installations being put on hold early in the during this pandemic. We also saw our local heroes, right? These were those that have watched over their communities for decades, really taking their trucks and delivering food services, right, to elders or just people in the community that needed support, whether it was heating solutions, right, because people are out of work and being able to provide those and make sure that those families were protected. It was really a coming together around what they do in terms of looking over their local communities. So just amazing to be part of this industry.
Yeah, really interesting use cases that you touched on there. The video one in particular, we do look at seniors' use of technology across the board, including things like telehealth, but just the kind of forced use of video communication across all customer segments, not just the tech savvy one, I think is going to really pay it forward for new product innovation, down the road. Yana, let me go to you, from your perspective at Craftful, as a software layer across connected products, are you seeing certain use cases really jump to the forefront?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, I would say a lot of things that Alice mentioned, I would agree with. In addition to that, I would say that beyond just regular healthcare, we've seen a lot of focus on connected health or proactive health, I should say, with, obviously everyone was seeing devices like Peloton take off when people couldn't go to the gym, right? But also some younger startups in the space like Mirror and Tonal and Tempo that were taking off quite a bit, just to name a few. Another thing we saw quite a bit was around a focus on air quality, particularly in areas that were heavily impacted by wildfires last year. Of course, wildfire season is not a new thing, but as people were locked in their homes and couldn't really get relief from being in the office or going to a museum on the weekend and enjoying some commercial air filtration systems, focus on residential became much heavier. One aspect of that was people looking to devices like Purple Air, where you can get access to local data and understand how is the air quality in my particular region. I think we saw user experience being a big hurdle there, not specifically for Purple Air, but just generally there's a lot of particularly for devices that present a whole lot of data of the type of presentation that like a data scientist may find really exciting, but a mainstream user is not going to enjoy as much data packed into their mobile screen that you'd normally want to see on like a desktop dashboard. So I think there's a lot of pieces there that can be developed quite a bit. Elder care, we've talked about that quite a bit. I think that's a really exciting area that there's been much more focused on. I think it's been a little bit of a missed opportunity in terms of, again, I think user experience is a big obstacle for adoption, particularly with the elder demographic. For Craftful powered devices, we've actually seen a lot of usage from the older demographics, but we focus on things like accessibility features and larger fonts, larger touch targets, things of that nature. But I think we'll all need to focus on lots of accessibility features to be able to make sure that elder care, connected elder care, can really take off in the next few years.
Yeah, that's such a good point. We know that in the technology space, the reality of the matter is that products are developed for early adopters and innovators, and they tend to be younger and more tech-savvy crowd. And so design of products for the senior segment is usually not in the first or second or third generation, right, of products. Well, let me read out the results of our poll here, and then would love to get, maybe Alice, I'll go back to you to see your reaction to this. But we gave 5 options. There are many more options than this, but residential security, home networking, indoor air quality, elder care and independent living, telehealth, health at home as separate, and then home energy generation and storage and management, to understand what participants think is the strongest opportunity really coming out of COVID-19. And it's relatively spread, so no one clear winner, but 28% picked telehealth. And then all the runners up, basically security, home networking, indoor air quality, and elder care. And then few people picked the home energy generation, storage management, which is interesting because we did see bills rise as, commercial energy use dropped substantially and home energy rose. So Alice, back to you on your thoughts on the results of that poll.
I'm not surprised at all. We just have gone through a pandemic, right? We're talking about people's health and safety, right? So not surprising. I will say what has come out of this is the adoption of technology. You kind of alluded to this, Jennifer, and so did everyone else. Everyone is aware of it, right? Everyone has said, okay, maybe instead of investing in a vacation this year, that project that we wanted to do within the home, right now is the time. I'd also say we're in an industry where it's become easier to adopt, right? What used to be available to the top 1% is now essentially available to all, right? These costs have certainly dramatically reduced, right? And allows for the adoption, but not surprising at all. I expect this will be on the forefront of, we're still going through this pandemic. I expect this will be on the forefront of people's minds for the next couple of years, telehealth.
Yeah. Well, I do want to zoom in a little bit on the security use case. And Michelle, I'm going to come to you next. So security has been really the leading value proposition for the smart home for many years. The security channel is a really important one when it comes to how smart products get into the home if they're not purchased as a point solution at retail. Oftentimes it's coming from the security industry. And we've seen a lot of blurring of the lines between the security industry and the smart home industry, and maybe they're just one and the same here. Obviously, Google and ADT have this huge partnership now, which speaks to that maybe even further. What are your thoughts about sort of the security space and the smart home space and how that's evolving?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting area. For many smart homes, this is how users get started, right? What I think is interesting about this area is given the breadth of the companies that are in there, you can start out with just a smart camera or a video doorbell because you may want to, like Ann did, I want to see my kids come home. I want to see who they're coming home with and make sure they're not bringing people home right now, right, during the pandemic. And so it's really easy for consumers to start small. But we've long thought that the security vertical, as we think about it, is really foundational to smart home. And as consumers get going with 1 or 2 devices, we see this, they'll get started with a doorbell or a camera, and then they'll invest further on the system, and they'll start adding more of a DIY system. And then they realize that they may want to get it monitored. So in many ways, what we're seeing now compared to probably 20 years ago, where you would go out and you would invest in an ADT system, a big, fully monitored system. We're seeing users start their smart home journey with just a smart camera, a door lock, a doorbell, and then they extend further into the smart home from there. So I think what's really interesting about this area is we're meeting users where they're at, right? If they want to get started with just something basic, they can do that for under $100 today, right? Or if they've just had a major life event, and I know there are security experts on this panel that would agree with me. Like some of these major life events, whether you just had a baby, whether your aging parents need to get a little bit more protection at their home, and you want to be able to keep an eye on them and make sure that their home is really secured, or maybe you just had a break-in. Some of those major life events are times when people step up their security. They want a fully monitored system, and so. I do think the lines are quite blurry, but what I think that we've done is we've expanded this foundation of individual kind of point security products into full solutions, and then made it really simple for users to step up to a fully monitored, full security system at the point in time when they really need it. And I also think that this is interesting when, we deal with at Google, we deal with all the spaces, right? Home security is one that really provides intrinsic value to the customers right out of the box, right? You immediately can monitor your home. You can sign up for video monitoring to be able to see what's going on at your home at all times. And in many ways, I think this brings more value to users than necessarily smart lights do out of the box or something like that, right? So I also think that this is such a high value area for consumers that is another reason why we're seeing this kind of merging of the space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, the security value proposition is one that you can clearly attach recurring revenue to, right? And people will pay for ongoing. And you make a great point about how security has traditionally been a reactive purchase for many, right? That because there has been a break-in or a life event. Do you think that the ability for consumers to get in with sort of less expensive, self-install solutions changes the mindset about security to more proactive purchasing?
I do. I think it doesn't require that major life event. Like door locks, connected door locks are just a convenience these days, right? Being able to give somebody a PIN code and let the nanny or the dog sitter or whoever into your home with their specialized PIN code during certain times of the day, that's a convenience factor. It's not so much a security factor. It later becomes a security factor when you realize you can make sure, remotely, if you've gone out for, the evening, to lock my door, right? So I think a lot of these devices are not just security oriented, but they also provide that security benefit that when other things happen to families, they start going, wow, I can further invest in this and use it for the security use case as well. So I think that's one reason that we're seeing a lot of growth in this area. And we saw a lot of growth in this area during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's perfect. Let me bring Dave in, since you're talking door locks, right, and access control from Allegion's perspective. What are your thoughts about, how maybe use cases are changing or the strength of that security value proposition, especially since you're right there at the access point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no doubt that there's been an increase in DIY solutions, and I think that's driven heavily by kind of this trend of technology, wireless technologies that are simplifying what's happening from an installation, commissioning, and setup perspective on the connected side. But let's be honest, we also know that there's still a segment of the do-it-for-me consumer out there, and that's where I think this overlapping of kind of the DIY versus the do-it-for-me solution that a security partner would play is really creating that overlap. And the key for companies is, how do we address still the consumer pain points and still progress with kind of this development of the ecosystems that are out there? Because I think those partnerships that are being created with the Googles and others, I think it reduces a bit of that need for do-it-for-me solutions. But what we continually look at from a Schlage perspective is how do we continue to kind of address key areas? Trust, obviously, in our legacy, that's all built on the perspective of I want it to still be secure, I want some privacy, I want it to be reliable, I want to have support for this solution that I'm putting into my home long term. And I think we're going to talk more and more about it, I'm sure, but interoperability. I want it to work with what is in my home today. And I think the example that Michelle gave about how people are expanding their systems is a great comment, because there's truth to that. They started maybe with a speaker, or they started with a light, and they're adding locks, and they'll continue to do that in their homes. And I think the third one really is the complexity, right? Previously, a lot of what was happening to the security channels was because it was much more complex. When you want to start adding monitoring, when you had wired solutions and there was a heavier installation burden, you wanted some expertise there. I think that has now started to become simplified. And I would also say there's another one. One of the things we've seen is, there's a reliability of bringing a professional in to determine your product selection. Oftentimes, I think over the past 15, 20 years, as was mentioned, you didn't think as much around brand. You thought as much around the reliability of the installer and who's doing the monitoring. Whereas on the device side, maybe there was less branded solutions inside of that package. And I think as the consumer adoption has increased in the smart home, now you have security players and security dealers that are really bringing in kind of the trusted brands into their solution, curating that solution out to the marketplace, because the consumers are seeing that interoperability as a key factor that they want to be able to continue to have in their homes. So that's a couple of things that I think built off a little bit what Michelle said, but I think that it's not going away, but the partnerships that are being created, I expect to continue. And as long as we can deliver on that trust and the simplification and make sure we're interoperable, we'll see adoption continue to increase.
Yeah, that's interesting. We're seeing in our data too, we survey security dealers every year, and they are offering more DIY products than ever, because even if you want, there's demand for that from the consumers, but they still want some help installing it, right? And so you're seeing this real blurring of lines, which is really interesting. Dave, back to you real quick. One thing we're seeing when it comes to security is the sort of monitoring opportunity being added. So professional monitoring really used to come along with a full professional security package. Now we're seeing those with DIY products add monitoring as well, right? Mostly in the camera space, right? Monitoring on top of a video doorbell, monitoring on top of the camera. What about for something like locks, right? Monitoring specifically the locks, or is it more really about that ecosystem play and how the lock fits?
Yeah, I think, when you think about monitoring in the camera space, usually there's a little less predictability around what it is that you may see, what that camera may pick up. Maybe it's motion driven, right? That's what we see most players in the marketplace delivering on from that monitoring perspective. One of the key things that we talk about in the lock world is intent. And as I think someone mentioned, it's a little bit less of an issue when you think about smart lighting activities. But when you think about security and you think about perimeter, especially on the home, intent is a really important factor. I may have given someone a code. How do I know that their intent to come in this time is maybe a negative one versus because they're intended to be there at that time? And so for us, and where I think monitoring continues to go from an access point perspective, is trying to understand what are normal times, what am I expecting to have occur, at 10 p.m. and what is happening right now at 10 p.m., right, or 1 a.m. for that matter. Or at 3 p.m. when my kids come off the desk, what am I expecting to have occur? And that is where we start to think about how we create better differentiation for the data that is being exchanged around what's happening at the opening or at the door itself. Partners that we work with obviously are interested in some of those types of data points as well. And that is where you start to think about less about managing a device and access to the device on a reaction basis. And you're starting to say, how do I become more notified, triggered, and I have that sort of monitoring experience relative to what's happening on the phone.
Yeah, absolutely. Points taken. That point on intent is really strong there, and needing to know the context of what's going on and data throughout the home that's helping us to, increasingly.
Yeah. And by the way, that's very valid not only in single family, but we were talking about MDUs and multifamily as a marketplace, and that is also a very critical aspect of what's happening in a resident unit, right? While someone mentioned that the building has all the keys, the physical keys today, when you go into the digital world and there's a credential to access that multifamily unit, you're also wondering what the intent is, right? If that credential was given to a maintenance person, was there a work order created at the time they're trying to use that credential on that door? Or maybe the credential doesn't become valid until there is one associated to that unit. And so there's not the ability to access until there's relational information going on about why that credential should be allowed into that unit at that time. So that's another example of where, this becomes a much more integrated experience, and it's there for the unit resident, and it's there for the property owner as well.
Yeah, certainly, really strong, maybe even stronger value proposition when you get into a circumstance where you have trust, not within a family unit and external, but lots of family, lots of households, plus the property management.
Absolutely.
Well, so I'm glad you brought up MDUs. That's one area that, I mentioned earlier in our session that we see as a really big growth area. We heard Vicki and Patrice talk about MDUs, also SMBs. We think when we think about different target buyers of the single family homeowner, that we see expansion for the smart home. And back to you, what new target customers are you really focusing on at alarm.com, or where do you see growth in sort of new target buyers?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There are so many different areas. Really, I think the challenge probably for a lot of us on the panel is where to focus our priorities and our efforts and energy, because in particularly coming out of the pandemic, the opportunities are just more expansive than I think any of us could have anticipated. We've talked a decent amount about MDU, and Vicki spoke a lot about that. I would just note that while we've talked a bit about the amenities, the smart home amenities, and the increased adoption of those within the unit, our technologies of several of us on the panel also allow for a far, far more streamlined property management experience as well. And being able to, just as Dave was saying, understand what's happening in terms of entering and exiting different units, what's happening in terms of water usage or energy usage across different units, access control, certainly coming off the last year has been a big one. So really increased opportunity there on the resident and property management side. But as you said, the incredible opportunity that exists in the small and medium business market is one that we're just extremely bullish on. I think coming out of the pandemic, or really even during the pandemic, we saw an absolute explosion in interest from SMB owners because they had needs such as property awareness and inventory awareness and protection when they weren't physically at their locations. Suddenly became a huge area of focus for many. And then things like employee access. You might have been closed down for 9 months. You might have had to lay off a lot of employees. Maybe you're bringing a lot of them back now, but you might have new employees, and you don't want to have to be keying and rekeying every time. So being able to have really streamlined, simple access control has been a real driver for a lot of SMBs. And then simply the ease of a unified platform. So for a small business owner, they're wearing 87 different hats, and being able to consolidate vendors across things like intrusion control, video, access control, and temperature monitoring and management is a real benefit to a small business owner. So that's an area that we continue to be excited about. And one other that I would mention is international growth as well. In the US, for the most part, we are further ahead of a lot of the world in terms of the adoption of smart home and smart business technologies. But we've all gone through this pandemic together, a true global event. And so a lot of the same needs and desires that we've been talking about experiencing here are certainly happening elsewhere in the world. And so there are a lot of markets where, again, the adoption is just much more nascent. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to help other geographies around the world become smarter and more connected, safer, and hopefully experiencing much more convenient lifestyles as well.
Yeah, to follow up on the international point, do you think that thinking about home ownership patterns and how they differ, right? The U.S. has a particularly high single-family home ownership rate. That makes the MDU opportunity even greater because there's a lot of MDU residents, that in international markets.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. And certainly we'll see some shakeout, even in the US and in some other markets. We saw a bit of a flight from urban areas across the pandemic where people really were anxious to get out of those urban centers and those big, tall, tight apartment buildings. I certainly think that will come back. But we did see some of that shifting in some international markets as well. I think internationally we'll probably see increased opportunity in the near term, though, with the SMB market. That market looks much more similar to what it does in the U.S., both in terms of the property types and whatnot. So I think that we will see both SMB and residential opportunities. But my guess is that in the U.S. the residential has really led the SMB. We may find in other markets that the reverse is going to be true.
Yep, that makes sense. So we've been quite bullish on smart home as a group, right? So far, I would like to talk about the challenges in front of the industry. This is our second polling question, so attendees, if you haven't jumped in yet, you've got a few more seconds to go in and record your perspective on what industry challenge most needs to be solved to hit mainstream smart home adoption. So the options that we're giving our attendees are interoperability, user experience, data privacy and security, affordability, and just value propositions across the board. Is this something that even moves the needle for me. So while we have our final results tabulating here, Dave, why don't you give us your perspective on the biggest challenge that you think is really in front of the industry to solve?
Yeah, I would take that first one and throw it at the top. I think interoperability continues to be a barrier to kind of hitting mainstream on smart home adoption. There's many people I know. I was down the path myself with multiple systems in their homes because one, they either didn't understand what was going to work with what, or they really valued a certain proposition of a device, but it didn't work with a different one, and they instead created a lot of complexity in their home. And I think what we've been talking about with the Connectivity Standards Alliance and where we're going with that initiative really helps to commonize, and it makes it easier for adoption to occur. When I think about the works with story on the user experience answer of this question, man, I think it may be time to eliminate the works with story, right? Because that creates a lot of consumer pain points in the marketplace that I think really slow down what the adoption rate really is. And then I would also say that, that means we as manufacturers and providers that are offering solutions to the marketplace, that's going to have implications on us, right? I'll take Schlage. It's no longer going to be that you got to the next communication protocol before your competition did, and therefore you were in the market first and you had adoption occur faster and therefore you got revenue, right? It's going to instead be, what am I differentiating myself on as a brand, as a solution, as a product in the marketplace, regardless of just being first with Wi-Fi, for example, or with Matter, as that continues to continue to grow. So I think that's going to be a big challenge for us in the industry to start to modify how we go to market, but in the marketplace and with the consumers, home builders, and that'll accelerate, I think, the adoption more mainstream. I mentioned builders. I would just say that when you think about one of the several of the approaches that the large national home builders have tried to take, they started with looking for that purchase of smart home devices as an upgrade to a home buyer. Then they started to say, we're going to offer the curated full service solution for the home buyer. But then they may have had a certain home buyer that said, well, that wasn't the platform I would have gone with, right? And so they either weren't happy with that or didn't want to pay for it. And you look at where we're going on interoperability, that eliminates some of those hurdles to start to get new home construction to become more connected smart home right out of the gate, with less complexity for builders and home buyers to be able to find the right solution that they're looking for in their own homes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Your point on works with, I wonder if we're actually making the buyer do too much work, right? Like figure out whose ecosystem, work with whose ecosystem, as opposed to the product's going to work, right? And it makes shopping way too difficult. And so there's obviously a barrier to purchase there. Well, the audience agrees with you. So the number one challenge ahead of the industry is interoperability. 38% picked that. Right after that is the user experience. Of course, those are tightly tied together. Then data privacy and security, and value propositions and affordability at the end. Certainly Matter, of course, is, you know, a fantastic, strong approach of trying to solve its interoperability issues. So Michelle and then Jake would love to come to you both to talk a little bit more about what Matter means for the user, and your organization's involvement, you know, in those programs would be helpful. So Michelle.
Sure, I'll jump in. Yeah, I actually think this is the next big step forward for the whole smart home industry. We're leaning into it very heavily, very excited about it. I think, you know, first, foundationally, it benefits device makers, right? Because it's going to lower their cost of development. Dave doesn't have to build for 3 different ecosystems, right? He can build for one. He can build for Matter. It's going to work across Google, Amazon, HomeKit, right? That's a big benefit for the industry because it's expensive to build for all ecosystems. It's one protocol, and hopefully we'll be able to pass those costs down to consumers. And I think also a big part of this as well is improving the setup flow. And making that easier for a lot of our device makers to be able to just deal with. It'll be much simpler. And finally, improving quality, because quality today inside the home, as we move more into this mainstream market and things don't work quite right in the home, it's very hard for users to diagnose. And so by being able to improve interoperability, have an IP-based network, native support for Thread, and we are very excited to see so many device makers starting to move to Thread. Google was very early in Thread, and it's been heartening as somebody who's part of the ecosystem and been working on Matter to see the Thread growth, because we really believe that that's a foundational technology next to Wi-Fi that's going to improve overall quality, given that it's IP-based and supports mesh, and it's you know, great solution for lower power devices. So we think about that for device makers. It trickles over to in a big way to users. I think one big problem that users have today continues to be setup. I just set up some smart lights in my kids' room the other night. It took too long. And I know how to do this, right? We are going to make setup across the board so much simpler for users. That's going to reduce that barrier to adoption. Again, the interoperability piece, they don't have to pick, right? They're going to be able to be confident that if it says Matter on there, it's going to be able to work across all of their favorite ecosystems and just work. I like, Dave, your comment on getting rid of works with. Because that actually should be a goal of the industry. It should just work, right? And then, as I mentioned before, for consumers, improving reliability and quality is going to be a big thing, because I do continue to think that's one of the barriers to smart home, is when something just stops working and they can't understand why, they just give up. And we can't have that in our industry. We've got to work. We've got to work every time. So yeah, suffice to say, we're very excited about where Matter's going to take the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I personally am dealing with a printer, a wireless printer that like will not stay connected at my house. And that's not even smart home tech. That is a mature technology that should work. It's very frustrating. Well, Jake, I'd love to bring you in as well and talk a little bit about what you think Matter means.
So I agree with Anne's comments and David's comments. We're big believers in Silicon Labs on Matter and what it brings. If you look at it from a 1,000,000-foot view down, first and foremost, when people look at buying connected devices, it's got to add value versus its non-connected counterpart. And then second order, you know, they want it to be easy to use, just connect, be affordable, be something that they can trust. And what Matter really brings is it really drives the interoperability problem. So you don't have to worry about, will my thing work with other things? And done right, this solves a lot of the frustration and the thought process of, you know, does this at Home Depot or Lowe's, will this work with the other equipment that I have in my home? It's just there, and it's irrespective of the protocol that's on there. So done right, this could be a strong unifying force to basically raise all ships in the industry. And to that end, Silicon Labs has been actively engaged in the Matter effort. In fact, beyond Apple and Google, we are the largest code contributor to the core development of that Matter, and it's because we believe so much that this done well and done with the thought process of making sure everything in IoT can work with everything else will reduce and drop a major barrier that the audience is bringing up and David brought up as a main roadblock in adoption of smart home and home automation.
Well, we thank you for those perspectives from both of you. I do want to take a question from the audience and audience members. If you have other questions, now's the time to get them in. We still have about 7 minutes left, and I want to make sure I'm taking audience questions. One is just, what is the industry doing to get to mass market adoption? So, Jake, I'll kick it right back to you as our last speaker here. So obviously we've got Matter making products work together. So there's a user experience issue. What else needs to happen? I will say that, Parks data shows, again, over 30%, right? A third of households do have at least one smart product. But if you look at individual product types, the smart thermostat, the smart light bulb, right, it's still pretty low, under 15% of households with any individual, not including smart speakers. So, how do we get there?
Yeah, so there's going to continue to be many more applications that are going to grow. And as you'll see, and we've seen this in the data the last 5 years, the adoption of connected products versus non-connected products is continuing to grow. And in almost every category that there's something that's non-connected, it's becoming connected because there's a value proposition. So 2 things that in my mind have to be done to really drive that forward. One is, in the ecosystems that are already there to drive adoption, it's getting rid of those roadblocks that we've talked about in this panel. Secondly, we need to enable the overall market and industry the ability to innovate in these new and unique use cases without having to be RF experts, without having to be protocol experts, without having to figure out how do I integrate these things in a small electrical system. And that's something that we focus on pretty heavily inside of Silicon Labs in terms of making those enablement technologies that make it easy for developers to not have to worry about those items and only think about how do I add value to the overall market. Because first and foremost, these IoT applications have to add value. And beyond that, it's making sure that we can make all these things work with other things seamlessly.
So we got a second audience question, which actually is another perfect one for you, Jake. So keeping you in the hot seat here. How do you see Z-Wave fitting into the smart home moving forward?
So Z-Wave is an extremely strong technology, and specifically in the security side. Security has got very specific requirements, right? When you're in a life safety application, it's just got to work. It's just, it has to be timely and be solid. And Z-Wave is extremely strong in that. And for professional and security installation, we see extreme strength there. And beyond that, we're seeing growth in some of the long-range applications that are bought into that are growing as well. So Z-Wave, we see a lot of strength. I think in terms of how does that fit into Matter and some of the other initiatives that are going on, this is all about the key challenge that Matter has to solve. Driving interoperability can't just be a thread and Wi-Fi thing. You have to be thinking about how do you bring that full ecosystem together. Because if you can do that, then no one really has to think at all. You don't want to have to worry about people having to completely redo what they already have and the infrastructure that exists in their home off of whatever the latest protocol is to rule them all, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The promise that I don't have to think at all sounds lovely, right? I'm looking forward to more of that in my life. Okay, so another question, maybe back to Michelle here. When you think about products, right? How much will product portability matter? Meaning moving products from home to home moving between platforms, right? Any thoughts on this question?
I think home to home is hard today. And I think we as an industry need to start addressing that more easily, because that's been challenging. A lot of it's just taking it down from one home and bringing it up on Wi-Fi in another home and having the factory reset and all of that. It's a big challenge. I actually just went through this, kind of middle of last year, and it was one of the things I dreaded most, was trying to get all these devices up and running and getting everything factory reset. So I think that is an area where device makers need to do better, because we've got to be able to improve that portability. But it is a little bit more of an edge case. People don't move that often. And while it's something that we need to address, I think it's not something that is kind of that day-to-day issue that we worry about. I do think that platform portability, and if I'm interpreting the question right, Jennifer, that's one of the things I think Matter's really going to help with, because let's say you've been on Alexa and you've had Alexa devices in your home, and somebody gives you a Google Home Hub, and you're like, wow, I really like this for various reasons. I'd like my lights to be able to work with this. Before, it wasn't that easy to be able to get everything working consistently in your home. And with Matter, because we're making this portable across the ecosystems, it's going to be very simple to be able to switch between ecosystems. And I think even more so to be able to switch into HomeKit with Apple, which was a little bit more of a burden before. So I do think that Matter is going to make that device portability between, if we're talking at the ecosystem layer, significantly easier for users, give them a lot more choice.
Yeah, certainly. And that HomeKit, I'm glad you brought that up. HomeKit piece is really important, of course, because we know, the massive amount of iPhone users, iOS users in the ecosystem, right, among consumers. And so the ability to make that interoperability a little bit easier, certainly important. So we have just a few minutes left to take us home. I'd love to come back to Jana and Alice, really on what you see the future holding over the next 1 to 2 years. Where does the smart home go from here? What innovations are you expecting to see? So Jana, if we could start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with the price of connectivity really plummeting in some sense, we'll continue seeing more and more companies add chipsets to their products across lots and lots of different types of products, like building material, appliances, furniture, clothing, toys. I think we talk a lot about early adopters in terms of users, but early adopter companies, right, of IoT and consumer products, they were all primarily electronic makers. I think the laggards are going to be companies that have been traditionally even further removed from software. So those types of companies in particular will need to have really robust off-the-shelf software solutions to support their development, to be able to launch really usable, stable products. So I think that's some of the exciting developments that I'm looking forward to in the next few years, and to be able to support that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and goes back to something that Daniel said about the huge transformation of manufacturing, right? And so you have companies, so the toaster always gets thrown out as an example for toaster manufacturers, but people may not have thought about the thermostat, right, as being something that could be very, very tech forward. And I think that Ecobee was the first to launch a smart thermostat over 10 years ago now. So really interesting to see manufacturing going through this transformation. Alice, same question to you. What do you see coming at the smart home?
Sure. I think advanced, analytics, intelligence, these solutions will turn from really more what I would still consider very reactive, right? You notify and then you're asked to take action, to be more proactive and truly smart, right? What's happening? What's the situational awareness of what's going on at that site? And it takes action for you, right? The cognitive load just on all of us today, right? Whether you're working remote, whether you have family members, right? The hustling and bustling, right? We don't want to be burdened with having to make some of these decisions, right? So these homes become smart, these businesses become smart and take action when when notified of an event. So I think that's really what we're going to see. We're seeing it in video today, right? So gone are the days of just seeing leaves and lighting started triggering. Now it's really the person, what's happening. Is this a known person? That's really where I see, it's sort of short term, next few years, big advancements in this industry.
Well, that will have to be the last word, Alice. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for your great insights today, really kicking off our core 25th Connections days here. So thank you all so much for your participation. I invite you all, as well as all of our attendees, if you'd like to join us next. We are taking a break from the Spot Card platform, and we're hopping into Zoom networking discussion. So our team will put the link into our networking discussion breakout into the chat panel of your platform. And so look for that there. And then we are back at 2 for our next set of discussions. You can also follow us on social media. So we're on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, and we launched our Parks Associates podcast, The Connected Consumer, today. So hopefully we'd love to have you listen as well as attending our events. So please check out that podcast. Looking forward to seeing you all in the home networking discussion, and then we'll be back here in a little bit. Thanks.